The environment, that's what a new federal report says tonight.
I think we all would have thought it was hard to believe that a governor could be worse on the environment than Edwards, but I think we're starting to see that now with the Foster administration.
It appears Governor Foster is in hot water for his environmental record.
The EPA says when it comes to making polluters pay for their crimes, Louisiana doesn't ask for very much. Scott Simmons is here with a story.
As it turns out, the EPA says some of the state's fines are the smallest around. According to the Fed's report, environmental polluters have less of a chance of being heavily fined for doing the wrong thing in Louisiana. And the EPA says it's time for the state to change its ways. Industrial Pipe in Oakville is an example we've shown you before. It's a landfill site cited more than 40 times by the DEQ, yet charged little or no fines. It's a trend noticed by the Inspector General's Office of the Environmental Protection Agency. It found, on average, that states like Texas and Oklahoma penalize environmental polluters more than 4 times the amount Louisiana does. In fact, our state penalties are among the lowest in the nation. Since Governor Foster took office, environmentalists say there has been little or no reason for a polluter to fear reprisals. The state argues that, wondering if more companies are simply following the rules.
I think that what would be surprising to most citizens to know would be that Foster's environmental enforcement is much worse than even Governor Edwards.
The EPA is not the only agency critical of the way the state handles its environmental business. In fact, here at the Tulane Environmental Law Clinic, they say the numbers really tell the story. Dating back to the late 80s, the number of environmental penalties have plummeted. More than 120 in 1989, 38 last year, 20 so far.
What we're seeing is that there's very little incentive now in Louisiana for a company to comply because, first of all, it's unlikely the DEQ is going to bother to catch them. And secondly, if they do catch them, they're not going to penalize them.
In fact, a recent study found that since Foster's administration took office, the number of DEQ penalties dropped more than 50%, and the amount of those penalties decreased more than 70%. Late this afternoon, I spoke to Dale Givens, who is the secretary of the DEQ. He says that he has no satisfactory explanation for why those numbers reflect that, but his office is now working on a new policy that sets guidelines for when penalties are imposed on violations and for how much. Believe it or not, they don't have that right now.
And the question now becomes what happens after this report?
Well, on the federal level, we understand they are now considering a full audit of the state's environmental policies. The result of that could come that in the worst case scenario, they withhold federal money from the DEQ or at the very least start handling more of the investigations and fines without the state's input.
We'll follow up on it. Thanks, Scott.